Okay. I wonder where Ron is now. There we are. Okay. It's just amazing to see people, filling in the grid work on the virtual community. Emily Harris, our producer, is going to be admitting people throughout the show, and we're recording live with our dear friend Alex Winter, who's in LA. I think it's LA.
Yep, I am. Yeah.
LA, and people joining from around the world. Alan Wexler, probably home in Brooklyn, looks like Brooklyn, and back from Copenhagen, I guess, or not yet in Copenhagen. And
I'm actually leaving this evening.
That's great, Alan. We're so excited about your show with Jane Lombard.
Me too.
At the festival, so we're going to be right behind you with that.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
It's exciting to see you. Sorry, can't have dinner tonight. Anyway, Ron Smith seems to be back in Cambridge. Yep, and Maria Fitzgibbon in Milan, New York. Hey, Mom, how you doing? So there's Alex Winter, our friend, and how amazing it is that after so many decades, Alex, we can all get together and talk a little bit, retrospectively, perhaps, about what you've been doing and the astonishing work that you've been able to do. Any comments you'd like to make, Alex, just off the bat?
Well, it's good to be here. I don't know if everybody is aware how long you and I have known each other, but it's quite a while. It's actually about 40 years to be
I apologize
precise.
for that. I apologize.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So, maybe 39 years, but somewhere between 39 and 40. And just to preface this conversation by way of that relationship, and your brother Alex and I are very close, and we were living together at NYU Film School back in the day, and we were all making art together and talking about art together, and you were up to all kinds of cool stuff then, as you still are, and I have very fond memories of sitting out on the stoop on Prince Street at all hours of the night, discussing the state of art and the world. And so I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful for all of our long-standing friendship and the fact that we, all these decades later, many of us are still at it. And still, engaged in the world with the world of art and activism, and in whatever way we're doing it, because there's many ways one can do that, right? One can do that sort of publicly, one can do that within the family, one can do that politically, one can do that just through their art. So it's an interesting conversation that we have been having for a very long time. So it's nice to be able to talk here.
I think, Alex, in this context, it's like now we can, absolutely declare that you are a cultural shapeshifter in your work. And we all know that this work doesn't get done alone, that there's a team.
Well, that's for sure. Yeah.
And now, perhaps in these strenuous moments of what appear to be difficult, dark times, that the community needs to be activated more than ever. This has been our conversation for decades, and things are maturing in our ability to activate communities, and your chosen medium. Now I think about the Idiot Box, which like I don't know if everybody is aware of the Idiot Box work of Alex's from MTV. Or was it VH1? What was it?
It was MTV. Yeah, that was when Tom Stern and I were directing together, and we made a crazy show for MTV that was one of the first live action shows they ever had. And it was a hyper aggressive sketch comedy show with a lot of commentary on the state of the world at that time. And that, it was 91. That was a crazy time for the world and the US as well for a number of reasons.
That was Gulf War time.
That was what?
Gulf War.
That's right. That was Gulf War time. Yeah.
I was in Switzerland.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
making drawings of compost as like to regenerate some sense of organic rehabilitation. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
and
and
that makes
it
me
was
think
around
of
the time I ended up
yeah.
making Bill and Ted 2 around that time, and we'd be watching the missiles flying around while we were shooting and trying to keep track of what was going on. It was a very crazy time, that year, that couple of years around the Gulf War.
Yeah. Alex, thank you so much for going into these deeper reflections of what was happening then. And how do you, and by the way, there's Karen Horowitz
Yep.
in Italy there.
Yeah.
And Ebba, I think maybe is in Austria. I'm not sure. People we don't even know, just through Margaret, and I don't know where Margaret went. Alex Halpern too. He looked like a Vidiot there for a second. Alex Halpern. There he is. Well, look, maybe we should get into a little more topical stuff. I want to say that, we all kind of have a muscular kind of skepticism, about the state, church, industry, media, the onslaught of traumas and crises and revelations of the past decade that certainly can be disillusioning and discouraging and cause anger, anxiety, fear, panic, pandemonium.
Yeah.
The work that you're doing provides another kind of information, a non-corporate kind of narrative, by deconstructing the corporate systems and technology systems and so on. How do you expect people to react? How do you want people to react, as individuals and community to the work, the news, the information you're providing? What kind of agency and go ahead.
Sure. I mean, it depends on the film, because they all kind of serve different purposes and have different approaches. But the doc that I have out now that just came out on streaming yesterday is about YouTube and really about Google, because Google owns YouTube. So I've been around the internet for a very long time, like going back pre-web. I got online probably around 85, 80, yeah, around 85, 86. When it was back in the BBS Usenet era, pre-web, all text-based communities and communication. And I was very active in those communities and found a lot of very robust and quite radical discourse going on there. Politics, art, culture. So it was an extremely invigorating community. It wasn't all good, just like anything else. When you put a bunch of people together, it's not going to be all good. There will be bad things going on, but it was very small in the scheme of things. And so fast forward, I started making documentaries about many things, but this is my fourth feature doc about technology. And they've all been about all those documentaries have been about the rise of internet-based community. That's been my focus, and the implication of putting a lot of people together without guardrails, or with very different guardrails than you have in off these platforms, like in what we call the real world. But it's all the real world as far as I'm concerned, but not on the internet. And that's had huge implications, for society. And so I've looked at that from a bunch of different angles over the years. And this one, what I hope, just to answer your question, is it doesn't really have a singular message or thesis. I try really hard not to do that. It really examines, in an artistic way, sort of a conceptual way, what YouTube's influence is on the globe at the moment and why. And And so that, I think the general response we've had, we premiered at Tribeca about a year ago, and we've been playing around the world in the intervening year before we released yesterday. And we've been playing theatrically. So I've been engaging with audiences around the world with the film as well. And so you never know what the response is going to be. What's been gratifying so far and surprising is that people who don't know much about technology, and then younger people who know an enormous amount about technology, especially YouTube, have been sort of very actively engaged with the film. And they're concerned about the issues. They're already concerned about the issues the film raises, that we put a lot more context to those issues, and then we put human faces to them. So we've had a lot of discourse that's been very intense. In fact, we just were a part of a disinformation summit at Cambridge University about 10 days ago. I was up there with the film.
Wow.
And we were showing the film to a great deal of experts in everything from ethics to technology to propaganda and terrorism even, and had a very robust discussion at Cambridge around the issues that are raised and the people that the film is about. So it's been a ride. It's been an interesting experience so far, and I think that personally, to answer your question even more specifically about what I hope these things do, is I think at best I just hope it engages people and raises probably more questions. And I think that questions are good because they can often compel someone to take action in their own way, like not a way that I instruct them to or care about even necessarily. But the idea, and art is great for that anyway, right? To sort of activate people and assume they're smart and assume they have their own agency, and they'll go do their own thing with whatever this material is you just presented to them. And that's how I feel about all my docs. I never sort of say, now go do this, or this is what the answer is. It's I tend to not do either of those things with the films.
Okay. I guess I'm curious of whether or not you feel that there's some kind of a movement or, a recognizable ripple effect of not just your work, but people who are working in the similar space that you're in. Is there some sort of sensation of a congregation or a more?
I think there is, but I don't think it's within my work or my field. I think that there aren't a lot. There's a lot of there's more in journalism that's beginning to happen. I would say a movement of tech and other journalists who are beginning to write much more clearly and honestly about what's going on. There's a lot of unclear and dishonest information about what's going on. It's not a conspiracy. It's actually business related, right? These companies make an enormous amount of money. They're all profit driven. They're mostly ad based companies, and they have pumped out an enormous amount of confounding misinformation to confuse lawmakers and government and the public from actually taking any action against them. So it's fighting against that. And I do think that there's a growing movement that is fighting against that. That's becoming more aware of what's actually going on, and that these systems are not all bad, that it isn't like an either or, like either you shut all this stuff off. Like we wouldn't be having this conversation right now if it wasn't for advances in technology's ability to pull people together and have them communicate online. That's what Zoom is. And it works really well, which is why we all lived on it during COVID. So these systems are an essential part of our lives, and they're not going anywhere, and we don't really want them to go anywhere. But we do want them to function better. And in order to do that, you have to break business models and monopolies. And the people who control those business models and those monopolies do not want those things broken up or modified. So that's the fight, obviously.
There seems to be, and if in fact we are in an apocalyptic time, which it seems that we are.
I hope not. I would like to think that our car, the car of human culture, is driving towards a cliff, but that there are many opportunities to avoid the cliff. And I understand the term, and certainly there's truth to it in terms of the collision of of sort of profit-driven technology, the rise of far-right autocracies, and the the issues of climate change, which are paramount, I would argue. So I think that we are in extremely treacherous times and perilous and precarious times, but I do see a lot of action towards averting disaster, which is encouraging. I just think there's enormous pushback, mostly from corporate interests, to prevent a lot of these systems from being changed because they have shareholders.
It's understandable that from the corporate perspective, that divisionism works in favor of the corporate structure, individual competition between people, and the self-absorption of the importance of an identity as self is itself a perpetration of some kind of other agenda than humanistic or ecologic. So it's okay. I'm not saying that we have an adversarial relationship to all that, but for example, when you make a film like YouTube Effect, you're essentially in some kind of a deconstruction process, an analysis, a discovery. Your own curiosity keeps informing you and expanding your breadth of information. And I think when you talk about people asking questions, we assume that people are curious, that they haven't shut down.
That's right.
You treat it into some opinionated, self-defensive bubble, either as a person or as a group. So the curiosity, it seems, is what art can actually nurture, and in a safe way, in a safe, non-threatening way. So the cultural activism that we're sort of working with and examining, around the world, I think takes that sort of a more, how can I put it, non-adversarial, creative position.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that philosophically, that's kind of how I've always come at my documentaries. I don't make kind of takedown documentaries or gotcha documentaries where I sort of lure a subject in and then attack them. I mean, there are people I've had in my docs who are doing things that I don't agree with. There are people I've had full-blown criminals in documentaries that I've done, that I've focused on.
Murderers.
Yeah, and
right.
all of that. Yeah. So it's not to say, that we don't have a point of view, because obviously we have a point of view. But to your point about art, I think that's right, and I think it's very important. And that's where what I do as a documentarian differs from journalism. And I think the essence of the aim with this work is to take someone, like you said, who has a fixed opinion, not to assume their opinion is wrong, not to come at them with judgment, but to create a story that constantly upends opinion. And that's essentially what we try to do with every doc we've done, is unseat you and unseat you and unseat you and unseat you, like, constantly, so that wherever you sit within the issue, you are, like, to your point, it's not aggressive, right? I'm not trying to jam you into another opinion, but it will lead you to consider other opinions, and also to question your own opinion. And I think that's a really important function of art with certain types of art. And I don't have dogmas about art, so it's not like I need it all to do that. But when it does that well, it's very effective. And I think that especially where we are now with in regards to the sort of technological industrial revolution that we're in, people have very fixed opinions about it. And because it's so complicated and it's moving so fast, and there's so much misinformation and disinformation about it, meaning intentional misinformation, we're fighting a battle where you really have to try to get people's minds to open. And I don't think we're going to have solutions to these issues if people stay too fixed. So that is a bit of the aim, or the agenda, such as it is, to to present arguments, counter arguments against the counter arguments, and hopefully open people's minds up a little bit. And I think when that works, it's amazing. And I think that that's where a lot of the effective work around climate has happened as well, for exactly the same reason. It is similar because in climate, what's going on is you're getting these sort of apocalyptic doom narratives, and this happens in technology too. And the problem with those narratives is that they are intentionally designed to shut the public down.
No. Please.
Yeah, I know that's not what you were talking about.
No,
I'm talking about something else.
But shut the public down. How does that? What does that look like? Like, what is that?
It means that if you believe that there's nothing you can do, that we've already passed the tipping point, that unless you're literally Shell Oil and have the control to literally turn the spigots off, you can't blow up enough pipelines, you can't destroy enough paintings at the Louvre. Like it's just too late. That's what I mean. So that's an intentional propaganda tool, largely by the fossil fuel companies, to prevent people from doing anything. And it's very, very effective because most people won't do anything. And in technology, you have a very similar narrative around AI and the algorithm, right? That has really been put forward by the tech companies to shut the public and lawmakers down. And in that narrative, they say, well, all this stuff is algorithmic. It's beyond our control. You wouldn't understand it anyway because it's very complicated. It involves, type of computer engineering math that you would forget.
Shut them down. Yeah.
So, and it just shuts everyone down. It makes everyone just goes home and goes, well, we're screwed. So what's the point of doing anything? And so I think it's creating counter narratives that say, no, there are things we can be doing. No, this is not really what's going on to a degree. And in some way get people activated, even if it's a small group of people.
So it's a trickle up. In the old model, the old paradigm, it's a trickle up.
Yeah.
In fact, that's where the power is. The power is, is on the ground. And last week, Emily and I went to a performance art piece in Delhi, New York, where we live now, upstate. And there was an artist who brought up the topic of the futility of recycling. That in fact, the whole dogma about recycling is a diversion, so people won't, address the real issues, which in this case, the overproduction of plastic.
Right.
So yeah. So there's a case of misinformation and massive, diversion and subterfuge of information. Yeah. Now we have that information, right, Alex? So, there was this concept of, well, we should bring our plastic en masse back to the supermarkets and just dump it there. Well, that's not a good idea because the people don't know what's going on in the supermarkets. You have to tell them what's wrong. Yeah. And then get them on your side. In other words,
it's like yelling at a telemarketer about something that AT&T is doing. Not exactly. The telemarketer is not going to be able to change what AT&T is doing. Though it may make you feel better.
Well, it could be fun. That could be
exactly.
Fun.
Exactly. You can offload some rage, but yeah. It's a really good analogy. The technology analogy is very similar. There's a narrative right now that's very pervasive that you should just put these devices down and go outside. And that you could not write better messaging if you were Google, because no one's going to do that. And to your point, it's sort of like the recycling argument. Like maybe some people will do that and they'll feel very good about themselves if they're actually accomplishing something. But the reality is we actually need these systems. We don't want people to stop using these. This is the problem is also the solution. An example on YouTube is ripe with all kinds of good things, but there's a lot of monetized propaganda there, right? In other words, very dangerous, politically funded, dark money operated influencers that are, inciting extremist terrorist action, oftentimes, which comes to be.
There was a guy in your film, right?
That's right. Yeah, Caleb.
Yeah. We met him at the show at SVA.
Yeah,
Rebecca last year.
Yeah, he's a lovely guy.
A great guy, and he was. Yeah. Just tell us about him for a sec, and keep going.
Yeah, well, Caleb. I mean, he's a person who really became radicalized on YouTube and talks very eloquently and specifically about what it did to him, which was really primarily it wasn't like it turned him on to political things he didn't know about, but it really began to kill his empathy. In other words, it worked on him on a very fundamental psychological and emotional level.
So in what context was he
All
radicalized? What
right. I
context?
mean, it was during all the fracas of around Charlottesville and the real mess that we were in at that time. And he's a really good example of what I'm getting at because Caleb eventually became de-radicalized by another influencer on YouTube. That's ContraPoint's Natalie Wynn's channel.
Wow.
And Natalie is a very brilliant um, influencer who's done a lot of extremely cogent pieces on many cultural flashpoints, including the radicalization of far right and white supremacist terrorists and things like that. A lot of which is happening on YouTube. And so, two people who'd never met each other, one of them on the platform that had hurt this guy saved this guy essentially, and that does happen fairly regularly. In other words, the YouTube is a big community, and there's an enormous amount there that's positive, and you don't want to shut these systems down. What you want to do is make them safer and better, which is doable. And so the argument to just put your device down and go away is a sort of a propaganda tool to get people off their back, to stop looking at the issues in a granular, nuanced way, because
Right.
that's where change will come. What you really want to happen is, and this is what I think the younger generations are doing, is to say, no, that's not good enough. It's sort of what's happening in climate. I don't want to leave this community, and I don't want to be harmed when I'm in this community. It's similar to someone in climate saying, I don't want to move to Mars, right? I don't want to abandon Earth. I want you to fix these bad business practices that you're engaged in that are killing our planet and killing
People do
humans.
want to go to Mars.
Well, I don't think anyone sane wants to go to Mars. So, I think that it's a lot of it is narrative, and I do think narratives are beginning to shift because I do think that people are realizing that that a lot of the solutions that are being touted are self-serving.
Okay, so now when we talk about shifting the narrative, okay, this is the work that Emily and Margaret and I are doing on the street, with a QR code and trying to activate people to recognize that we can influence the algorithm. That actually we can shape it almost like a substance. Do you have any comments about that? We've talked with scientists about it, other artists, Kristen Geiger a couple of weeks ago, who works
Yeah,
with AI.
I think you absolutely can. Though I do think that there are many different kinds of algorithms, as you know, because the term is extremely broad. It's sort of
I
like
don't
the
know.
term.
I don't know.
Okay,
Tell us.
the
Tell
term
us.
algorithm is very, very broad, very similar to how the term AI is very broad, and encompasses a great deal of things. So, in terms of YouTube and how it works, there was a very specific algorithm called the recommender algorithm. That's what was rabbit holing people, meaning that you would go on YouTube and you may be searching for fuzzy slippers and then find yourself going down a rabbit hole of alt-right extremism that would get more and more and more radical. They have done work on that algorithm. They have, to be fair to YouTube, in my view, really largely corrected the rabbit hole effect. However, the algorithms at YouTube that still promote radical content or extremist content or highly funded politically ideological content, which is essentially monetizing propaganda, which is a very dangerous thing for
Yeah.
a company that big to do when you have 4.6 billion views of this content every single day, right? That algorithm is incentivized by human beings. I mean, it is literally it is there to bolster their business model. So yes, you can affect algorithms to the degree you're talking about in terms of what type of content you're on, what sort of information. There's been some good articles recently about how people are starting to put information into YouTube intentionally to tweak algorithm to counter disinformation, which again is intentionally dishonest information. That's sort of its definition compared to misinformation, which is largely just information that is incorrect.
So
So
that could be fun. to be doing that.
Yeah, and that will have an impact, and that will have a kind of a pervasive spread. And the more of that happens, the better. The only thing that concerns me there is that you have to remember that this is, at the end of the day, it's not a public utility, right?
Right.
That's where the free speech arguments fall off the wayside in terms of their
It's business.
validity.
It's business.
It's a private corporation, right? It may be public in terms of being a publicly traded company, but it is a private corporation with a business incentive, and so they're not going to enjoy the algorithm being tweaked too much to a degree that it affects their bottom line.
Yeah.
And if there's less eyeballs on the salacious content that drives less ad revenue, to their coffers, then they will have a problem with that, and they will counteract that in terms of the algorithm.
So, Alex, from a maybe utopian perspective, okay, slightly idealistic perspective, if we can shift or create a different industry that will nurture the corporation through different content, then this shift can happen where, that can be a mass movement. I mean, the idea was, when we climbed the bridges in 77 to create a new kind of news content, so that the idea was that we can shape the narrative. So if there's a concerted effort among a group of people, we can do that.
I think that's right. I think
you're confirming that.
Yeah,
you're confirming.
I think that there's two things at play that make that not only possible but probably already in motion on a certain level. One, to credit YouTube, I would really argue that Google is not at heart a nefarious company, and that there are a lot of people there who are very bright, who have very good motives, and they not only allow but they incentivize very positive influencers and other forms of communication on YouTube itself. So to the degree that they make the money they want to make, there are ways of plugging into a new world, new news, new information, even with the ecosystem that is YouTube. However, and this is where I think it's going to take us a little longer to get past the bumps, what we really need to be doing, which I think is happening in little ways, is break these monopolies up, right? So that you don't have the entire global ecosystem on one platform, which is ludicrous and dangerous, frankly. So really, I think that the world we're going to be entering into is one that's far more splintered. And not to get too granular with all this, but I think what's just happened with Twitter is a really good real-time example of that.
Oh, yeah.
Because going back to my own beginnings, like I started on the Usenet groups where there were, for any of us who were interested in that back at the time, there were hundreds of channels. And that's not a lot, but that is a lot. It was like alt-rec this, alt-rec that, philosophy, sex, politics, whatever, literature, poetry, radical politics, Marxism. And you would very easily hop around on all these different communities, and they all had different people in them that you knew. So for people like me, I've never had a problem being on multiple platforms ever. For most of our generation, sort of boomers, Gen X, millennials, they have had more resistance to being on multiple platforms because they're so conditioned to the internet being the central database. That's how they connected to the net. I never connected to it that way. I came in way earlier than when it got centralized. So when Twitter got taken over by Musk and just destroyed within a week, most of that community of billions of people flipped out. Like they didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go. They felt like their community had been destroyed and they did not have another community to go to. All these other places started to pop up, some of which were already there. Mastodon, Blue Sky, eventually Threads, whatever. And so what's happening now is this massive ecosystem, which had enormous power, right? All these presidents were there, all these different countries, real world stuff was happening in a community online. A lot of these people are beginning to realize they don't need one central place to communicate, right? That they can actually function just fine in different areas. And I think that's the future. I think that the future is going to be more in a very healthy, functional way. This is the good side, not all good. Will be more fragmented and compartmentalized, so that, to your point,
you see this happening. You're seeing that.
It's beginning to happen. It's people are beginning to realize that this was not ever a healthy function of the internet. To have something so centrally organized,
Monopolized.
that's exactly what I was about to say. Creates monopolies. It allows the monopolies to stay in existence, and I think that is an extremely unhealthy condition that we're currently in, and that's what I think needs to happen with Google. I think that the big three, essentially, if you sort of look at like Meta, Microsoft, and Google, there are more than three, but are monopolies that need to get broken up, and I think that that's going to take time. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. But I do think that ultimately that's the reaction to this industrial revolution that hasn't happened yet. That's happened in pretty much every other industrial revolution before this one.
Alex, if you don't mind, I just want to call attention to the fact that in the chat right now,
which I have not looked at, sorry.
Emily is posting links for the streaming of YouTube Effect. And we're going to be doing that through our website and social media this week.
Okay, great. This is the easiest one to watch it.
Okay, there you go, folks.
Yeah.
Yeffect.com.
YTeffect.com, watch. Yeah, that'll get you right to the thing.
Alex, I'm very sensitive. Emily and I are very aware that you've given us a very long time today compared to your other interviews. We have, is it correct? We have about 5 minutes left. How are you doing on time?
I'm fine.
Yeah. All right. Well, can we contextualize something? Because I'm from a sort of cultural activism, scholastic point of view, I'm kind of curious. Historically, in Hollywood, we had these sort of rebels like Marlon Brando, who came out for the Native Americans, and Paul Newman and Robert Redford, ecologists, and Newman, with Newman's Own. And Richard Gere one time said to me, "Hey, I'm making money as an actor so that I can support the Tibetan movement and all this business." So,
yeah,
the precedent for the philanthropic activities through the agency of celebrity has sort of taken off. And how is it, for example, that you were enabled or inspired or mentored to do this great work? And tell us a little bit about how the miracle of funding is that happening through your acting income, through your visibility, as a celebrity. You have your friend Keanu Reeves, who has his own philanthropic activities. In fact, we met someone last week whose book was published by him, Anu, an art scholar in UCLA. So tell us a little bit about this context and from the perspective of how is this really happening, and is this an indication of a...
Sure. There's a couple different things going on. I mean, one is that, I was raised in a family of artists who were very politically active, and there were also journalists in my family, and so activism was something. I think it was at my first protest at like 6 years old, so it's always been a big part of my life. I've always had, in terms of art, and this is something that you and I discussed, crikey, like over 30 years ago.
Sure.
Like I've always thought that, I've always been drawn to art as kind of an act of civic engagement. It doesn't have to be. Again, it's not a dogmatic view of art. It's just how I approach work, and I think that one can either completely divorce oneself from worldly issues and make art and make very good art, or one can have a more civic-minded approach. And I've always felt like being part of the world was very important to me. And so, I acted like from 10 years old until 25 nonstop. And then I really quit acting to just kind of get back into the real world and had more normal jobs and was in and amongst normal people, which.
Were you conscious, intentionally doing that as a kind of retreat?
Yeah, well, I was in an ecosystem that was really siloed for so long. It was beginning to do my head in a little bit. So it was for my mental health as much as it wasn't just like this politically, I needed to be amongst regular folk and sort of living a more normal life. And this is not uncommon for child actors who are just, in the business from such a young age.
You made a film about it.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So, the having an active engagement with what's going on in the world is extremely important. And documentaries are obviously a very specific, immediate way of doing that. I don't think everything has to be that. The thing I like about acting is that it's similar in that you are playing a character, you're researching time period, you're researching the socio-political background of that character, you're really engaging with society, right, in a very specific way. If you're acting that way, which I do. So there's that. In terms of the fundraising, it's helpful to have some notoriety in order, but I don't just pick up the camera and go shoot stuff. I have a small production company. It's a job. I don't, we all get paid. I get paid. I don't start a project until it is sold and fully funded. So raising funds for docs is not easy. It's a huge part of what I do is raising money. Not everybody wants to finance, and docs are not inexpensive. I mean, they're not as expensive as making Avatar, but they're not, inexpensive. So someone's got to give you millions of dollars, and often my docs are politically oriented, and finding people who want to do that can be tricky. So the celebrity, such as I have it, I would sort of consider myself a minor celebrity at best, but I do have notoriety within the industry. And I have been around a long time, and I have a lot of connections in these spaces. And, certainly that's helped me raise money. It
In
just
some
doesn't always.
spaces, are you considered a pain in the ass in some spaces, Alex?
I don't think so. I mean, probably to some people, but I think that I'm certainly, known as one of the doc filmmakers who sort of is willing to take on,
Yeah.
if not dangerous, then difficult and certainly hot button issues. But I'm also not, I don't make rabble rousy stuff. So, I tend to come at my subjects with respect, and I tend to come at the topics with respect. And I think that's, that is known. But it's also, sometimes that's not what people want either. They want you to be salacious, right? That's why YouTube makes so much money.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I just want to point out, our friend Leela Daw just entered, and Leela worked with your father and probably met you when you were a kid. And she was so ecstatic to know that you were going to be with us today. So,
oh, that's great.
Leela, thank you for joining us. There she is. Yeah.
Yeah, my dad was, he's not alive anymore, but he was a choreographer, modern dancer. My mother is a modern dancer as well. She had her own company. My father had his own company. His company is still going. It's MADCO, the Mid-American Dance Company.
Oh, wow. It's still going.
Yeah, he co-founded that. Yeah, that's still going. In fact, they had their 50th, maybe even 60th, 50th, I think, anniversary. A couple of years ago, I went out for it in St. Louis.
Wow. Wow.
And Ross and Alcine Wiltz, they created that company together. And Al's still around. So yeah, so I grew up with.
Wow.
I mean, it's not dissimilar to the question you just asked me, John, because I grew up with two parents who. I mean, my mother taught dance at Washington University after she put her company down. But my parents relied on grants. They relied on the NEA at a time that Reagan had taken over and was killing the NEA and killing funding to the arts. So I grew up in a family that was always trying to figure out how to make the art that they wanted to make and deal with funding and be scrappy and kind of self-sustaining. And those are, that's how I learned to do what I do. And
It sounds really familiar.
yeah, doesn't it? I mean, and so it's like, sure. It's like as soon as I got any celebrity or notoriety within the industry, I just immediately just try to exploit that to raise money for my own work. So it's just, that's just what we do. And I'm doing, all these years later, that's what I'm still doing.
Is this conversation a good place for you to be or talk today?
Yeah, I mean, look, be able to speak to someone like yourself that, we've known each other a long time, right? So there's a kind of an understanding of the climate that we're in and also where we've come from, right? The world is very different today than it was in the 70s and then in the early 80s when you and I met. And in terms of how one kind of makes art, how one self-sustains, how one funds, all of this stuff has changed considerably. I would say that one of the tools that has been helpful is technology. I think the ability to connect and reach other people around the world in order to communicate your art and also to raise funds for your art is a huge benefit. And it has
So
actually helped me.
exhilarating. So
Yeah.
exhilarating. Yeah. How can we help you to get more eyes on this film? And then we have a bunch more concepts and things we could talk about. But how can we help
I
get
would
the
I mean, honestly, for me, just if you get a chance to see it, I hope you like it. And if you like it, tell your friends. If you don't, that's fine too. I get it. Not everything is for everybody. So, we're doing, I have to say, I'm grateful. We've been doing pretty well. We've had a lot of press. We've been making a lot of noise. We're going out to do summits at universities now. We're going to Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, USC. We're going all over the place to do symposiums around these issues and to show the movie and talk about what's going on. So we'll be hoofing it for a while.
Alex, we have a couple of questions, and then we'll say a good evening to you and have a good afternoon. One of the questions Emily wanted to ask you, she's got it, and Margaret has a question. Are you ready? Or should I do Margaret?
No, I'm ready.
Can you hear her?
Yes.
You hear me? Okay. I'm was interested in the way over the years how you've been making the documentary films. Are you challenging some of the prevailing assumptions of documentary film? Are you like stretching the genre? How are you playing with it, experimenting with it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound presumptuous. I also, like any magician, don't want to give my tricks away. Um, so I would only say that there are certain things about the doc form that I love. There's certain things about the modern doc form that I do not love. And I have been very slyly trying to circumvent the things I do not love. One that I would actually be open about is I think there is a real trend in current documentary to be gotcha, to throw chum to sharks. And as we all know, even though the docs are largely to a more intellectual audience, intellectuals like having chum thrown to them as much as, the back row of the Coliseum, right? So I don't like that. I think it's disingenuous. I think it's in bad faith. And I think it treats the audience and your subject like idiots. And I think it prevents what you're doing is you're telling the audience that whatever opinions they've already formed are right, and they don't need to do any more thinking about anything. And I really try to blow that up. And so I think some of my films may have seemed provocative or anger-making. In fact, I'd say to some of the even doc community has been offended by some of the things I've done. And those are not unintentional. That has been my intention to offend them. So that's about all I want to say as far as that goes.
All right. Margaret, do you want to pitch your question or should I read it for you? Go ahead.
Yeah, if you can hear me, I can pitch the question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I would like to ask you, since humans and technology are so tightly intertwined, we cannot anymore look at these two entities separately. Are you aware of technologies that might break the vicious circle of misinformation and manipulation, perhaps something comparable to immunotherapy, the inserting of cells that inform the fight against bad agents?
It's a great question. That's actually a really good question. We spent a lot of time at Cambridge talking about this because the other panelist that was on our Q&A has just written a book that looks at the spread of disinformation as an actual virus. And talks about the inoculation of disinformation. And it's a really good book. And it's called, oh, crikey. I've had such an incredibly busy couple of weeks. I'll try to remember the name of it and I'll get to John. But
That's okay. It makes me think about the Crimes of the Future, the Cronenberg film.
Which is a great, I love that movie.
Artist, right?
Yeah, that's a great book. Yeah. And so there's absolutely ways of coming at this. I would say less from using technology and more from a behavioral science, behavioral psychological direction. Though that can
so
get
like
fed
what do you call unseating? What do you call unseating? I love that term.
Yeah, exactly. And also pre-bunking is another term that they get into in this book, which is to create ways of getting to people before you have to debunk ideas they have. In other words, you're pre-bunking disinformation before it gets sort of implanted virally within a subject. Really great and very actionable. You read it and you think, oh, that makes an enormous amount. It's not like pop psych speak. It's very actionable. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of methodology that will help us in that regard.
Thank you.
Alex, how is this show? How is your work? How is your creative life sort of shaping your concept of yourself? Just the last question, and then we'll say goodbye. How is this? What do you notice? Of course, you've been in therapy like some of us have. And,
yeah, for like 25 years. Yes, I have.
Well, only 25 years. Yeah.
Yeah. I have another 25 to go, and I think I'll have figured it out. Look, I won't, I know. You have to be open-minded. I think that what it's like having I'm very grateful that we've been able to make, I mean, this is probably my 8th feature doc, and I've made several shorts. We've had a good run. I don't ever know what the next one's going to be, whether we'll get the next one off the ground. I'm going to need to do something else. If I'm going to, I want to do something else. I do like to do different things. So I have a fairly open mind about this stuff, and I try not to get aggressive with myself about, needing to say the next thing, needing to have the next thing out. And I don't think I'm that important either. Like anyone really needs to hear what I have to say that much. So I think that I have gratitude for whatever project I'm in while I'm in it. And then I'll sort of look to what the next thing is, but in a sort of non-aggressive way. I like to work. I like doing what I do for a living. But it doesn't have to be this activist, doc-oriented. I don't have to make art that way. I want to do more. I intend to do more. But I'm pretty easy on myself about knowing that the market, there are a lot of variables outside of my control in terms of what I will or will not be able to get into. That being said, I think that being so inside these issues over the last several years, given what's been going on in the country and the world for the last several years, has really has galvanized my politics in very specific ways. And I would say I'm not like I'm less open-minded, but I am less likely to tolerate extremely extremist views, even people that I like, than I used to be, because I think the stakes are very high. When you get inside things, and I know this isn't I don't have some insight that all of you probably don't already have, but what happened to me was when I got inside these issues, you really realize how high the stakes are. And the harms are real harms, and people get killed. And what seems like a very innocent, in terms of looking at disinformation, which is what my current film is doing, during the 2016 election, even preceding that election, I started to lose some friends who were really bright, like some of them were college professors who were falling prey to very obvious extremist propaganda, like the Pizzagate scandal, things like that were just so clearly not true. And then they just went down this pipeline that was so awful, and it just ruptured our friendship. And now they're like in full blown extremist crazy town land. And people get killed because of these views. So I think when you're inside it and you see firsthand how dangerous where we're at is, it's definitely galvanized me that way politically.
Well, man, we've cultivated such a hyperbolic society.
Yeah.
It's forcing people into these extreme fanatic states of mind and compartmentalization and cultism and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's so interesting from an anthropological point of view.
Highly. Yeah.
And, I would like to tease you with perhaps an invitation to collaborate outside the medium that you've been working in, and perhaps we can have some fun talking about that.
Well, let's chat. Yeah.
Yeah. Alex, thank you.
Great.
You've given us more than we were planning on, and you're so generous.
That's great.
We're really, really happy and grateful. So lots of love and power.
Lots of love.
Keep on. We're with you.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everybody.
Love you.
Love you. Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.